So this is the continuation of the communicating with the predecessor in the chapter 5, which is first discussed by the previous reporter. So I'm Roel HABAC from CBET 01701P. As the previous discussion, we already know what predecessor auditor is and how it was defined by the Philippine Standard on Auditing or PAS, and also according to statements on auditing standards. So now, let's talk about more on successor auditor. Ano nga ba siya? Ano ang difference niya with the predecessor auditor? We already know the predecessor auditor, but how about the successor auditor? So in this case, when we say successor auditor, this is the outside auditor of an organization that replaces the predecessor auditor, or in other words, he is the new auditor or the incoming auditor. So the successor auditor will conduct the audit for the current year when there was a predecessor auditor in the previous year, because there are cases where the auditor is still the same who audits the previous financial statements and the current financial statements. But if that is the case, then there is no predecessor and successor auditor because the auditor is still the same. So again, this will come if there are two different auditors in two different periods. So the successor auditor might have hired, or he or she has been hired because the predecessor was maybe fired, or because the client is required by the law to change the auditor periodically. So again, sa conduct ng isang audit, isa sa requirement na dapat is the client entity should at least change auditor for example for every 2 to 3 years to minimize yung possibility of impairing the independence of the auditor, especially if the auditor and the client have established relationship that may cause impairment to his or her independence and may influence his or her opinion kasi familiar na sila with each other, na for sure makakaapekto dun sa auditor dahil sabihin na natin na close or friend na sila, which is not good for making an opinion. So pwede yun ang reason kaya nag-change ng auditor. So the successor auditor must also obtain, as mentioned earlier, na need ng permission of the client before he or she can discuss the audit issues with the predecessor auditor. So this is done again before he or she may accept or reject the audit engagement. Sa slide naman na ito, may emphasize when the permission is not given, which means that the client does not allow the successor auditor to ask information related to the previous audit from the predecessor auditor. So this means it's already a red flag, which is hindi lang sa love life may red flag, pati sa auditing. It is already a red flag because the predecessor may have encountered problems with the client. This is why maybe kaya siya nag-resign, or reason why he or she did not complete his or her audit with engagement to the client. Kaya isa ito dapat sa maging consideration ng successor auditor if he or she will accept or reject the audit engagement. When the predecessor or existing auditor receives the communication of the newly proposed auditor, he or she preferably answered in writing. Bakit sabi mas prefer na in writing? Why not orally? So because oral explanation on their own do not represent sufficient support for the work. If the successor auditor proceed with the engagement, the new or incoming auditor must obtain appropriate audit evidences from his or her predecessor auditor's working papers. First is dapat yung opening balances, which is very crucial and important, ay walang misstatements that is materially can affect the financial statement of the current period. Dapat the incoming auditor must check also if all the closing balances is correct, kasi yung closing balances natin na yun sa prior period ay magiging opening balances natin, which is sabi nga natin it should be free from error or misstatements, which can materially affects our presentation of financial statement in current period. If it's not well presented by the predecessor auditor, remember, as discussed by previous chapter, the auditor should identify significant accounts and disclosures and the relevant assertions. Ibig sabihin natin sa relevant assertions are those financial statement assertions that have reasonable possibility of containing a misstatement that would cause the financial statements to be materially misstated. So example nito ay yung discussion natin sa management assertion, which is occurrence or existence, completeness, evaluation or allocation, rights and obligation. Ayan yung mga example if you can recall it. So the successor auditor naman must also know if there is change in accounting policies or consistent ba yung application niya. To identify consistency matters that might affect the report, the auditor should evaluate whether the comparability of the financial statements between periods has been materially affected by changes in accounting policies or by material adjustment to previously issued financial statements. We must take note also the professional competence and independence of the predecessor auditor. So now, for closer look about the successor auditor definition, let's define successor auditor according to the definition of PSA, which is the auditor who is considering accepting an engagement to audit the financial statement, or an auditor who has accepted already the audit engagement. So it is the same as the first definition that we had about the successor auditor. In simple terms, the successor auditor is the new or the incoming auditor. So based on the statement of the auditing standards, they define successor auditor as an auditor who is considering accepting an engagement to audit the financial statement but has not communicated yet with the predecessor auditor, and he or she also the auditor who accepted such engagement. So it is as the same as the definition given by the PSA. So that's it for the predecessor auditor and successor auditor. Thank you for listening.